Okay. Thank you so much. ये सब बोलने की जरूरत नहीं है वैसे. Oh, I don't need this actually. I have a microphone of my own. Excellent. Well, thank you, Ashwarya, for the introduction, and it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you to the CDRI for making time so that we can share all of these amazing solutions through this particular conference, and also because of the PechaKucha format of 3 minutes and 20 seconds per presentation. On behalf of all of the presenters, they wanted me to express their gratitude to CDRI and their partners as well for making this all happen today. So just to very quickly introduce myself, I'm Monica Bennett. I'm the Director of Thought Leadership at the Global Infrastructure Hub. The Global Infrastructure Hub is a G20 entity, and we help the G20 governments accelerate and advance the financing and implementation of sustainable, resilient, and inclusive infrastructure. And so today's session is going to be incredibly important, from that perspective, but also from the perspective of everybody from the industry, where, for which resilience, obviously plays a key part and has a huge impact. Our session today is a great follow-on and culmination to a lot of the discussions that have been happening throughout the last 2 days. Today we're going to be talking about examples of successful financing and de-risking solutions for resilient infrastructure. And I guess before we get into those presentations, I just very quickly want to reiterate the importance of having these kinds of financing solutions and the importance of being able to scale up the availability and accessibility of those financing and de-risking mechanisms for resilient infrastructure. As has been discussed through quite a few of the panel sessions previously, there is wide recognition that resilient infrastructure is needed. Through a lot of the data that we've seen through our work at the GI Hub, we're seeing that governments are introducing investment into adaptation through their G20 long-term plans and strategies. However, the implementation, how this can potentially happen and how this can potentially be financed is not necessarily included in those plans and strategies. And so there's a real need for us to be able to discuss the successful mechanisms for how that has worked in the past. So while there is that wide recognition that this is needed, there is still a very significant adaptation financing gap. So if you look at some of the UNEP data from 2018, they have estimated that around $300 billion needs to be invested into adaptation by 2030. And to put this into context, this is around 6 times higher than the pledges through the NDCs, and around 13 times higher than the current levels of public financing into adaptation. Now, this is obviously a very big gap and almost nearly impossible to be able to cover through public financing, and therefore scaling up the participation of private sector investors is incredibly important to making resilient infrastructure happen. And if you look at what some of the opportunities are for being able to scale up this kind of investment, the World Bank in 2021 reported on 3 particular opportunities that we need to pursue. So the first one is to be able to make available localized climate risk and vulnerability data. The second is to increase financing and de-risking mechanisms through blended finance, risk mitigation, and revenue boosting measures in order to mobilize private sector participation. And the third is to be able to set up effective institutional arrangements for multi-sector adaptation and planning. And through this particular session today, we're actually going to be listening to people that have implemented successful solutions across all those three different areas. So I am very excited to be able to welcome our list of speakers here today, and they're showing up there on the screen. We have 9 speakers, and to be able to break that up into manageable chunks, we're going to group them into 2. So the first session of 5 speakers is going to talk about the financing solutions, and the second group of speakers is going to talk about the instruments for risk transfer and risk mitigation solutions. So without further ado, I would like to introduce our first speaker, Ms. Emily Corwin. You can join me up here on the stage as I introduce you. So Emily is the Director of Nature-Based Engineering Solutions at Conservation International. She is engaged in creating the science, solutions, partnership, and field examples needed to bring an innovative green-gray infrastructure approach to the world's most vulnerable communities. Today, she's going to be talking about her case study on financing green-gray infrastructure. One small step for finance could be one giant leap for nature. Emily, over to you.
Thank you, Monica. Great. So to get started, in the country of Guyana, 90% of the population lives along the coast, and most of them below sea level. In some locations, they've restored mangroves in front of strengthened seawalls. And these two, the mangroves and the seawalls, work together to reduce the risk of sea level rise and storm surge. And these green-gray solutions draw upon the best of our engineering achievements to create hybrid solutions along the infrastructure spectrum. So in our most built environments, a gray-only solution like seawalls may be most appropriate, and on the other end of the spectrum, a green solution like mangrove restoration or conservation may be best. So to realize these solutions, like the ones depicted in the next 3 illustrations that are taken from the San Francisco Bay in California, which is where I live, our goal is to fundamentally transform the engineering and construction industry to design and build with nature, to address multiple hazards like flood and fire, and install infrastructure that makes cleaner air, cleaner water, and reduces extreme heat, and benefits both people and nature, to create the next generation of climate-resilient infrastructure. And this type of infrastructure has the potential to deliver outcomes that our gray-only solutions will never be able to do, like rising as sea levels rise and repairing themselves after extreme weather events. So we need to build more of these projects out in the world, like a project that we worked on in the Philippines, where communities built sediment-trapping fences, rock breakwaters, and created the conditions to restore mangroves. And those work together to reduce the risk of damage from storm surge and wind waves. So these types of built examples are so important because they give us the confidence to mainstream nature into infrastructure delivery. Another tool is a project we worked on in Guyana. This mangrove seawall engineering guidance is enabling government partners to plan and design green-gray solutions as they would gray-only alternatives. But we continue to be challenged to inspire investment from the finance community, because we can talk about the benefits of nature-based solutions, the livelihoods, the biodiversity, the climate resilience, but we're challenged to guarantee a return on investment. So one thing we need to do better is our cost-benefit analysis of infrastructure and truly quantify the environmental and social benefits that nature brings. We did that for a project in Colombia, where we identified a green-gray alternative for a roadway project that was 3/4 the cost of a gray-only solution and resulted in $3 billion of net benefits over the project life. So nature is not a nice-to-have or an add-on to our projects to realize a resilient future. It's an essential ingredient. And the 2 things we need to do to help realize this resilient future are produce green-gray guides that are relevant to the environments where we're working, and improve our cost-benefit analysis to truly account for the benefits that nature can realize for us. So thank you.
Thank you, Emily. That was a great presentation with some really great impact. So, there are obviously significant benefits to implementing nature-based solutions. But what do you say to some of the skeptics that might not necessarily recognize that nature-based solutions can provide, similar if not better performance when it comes to, being an infrastructure asset or even providing a service?
Yeah, so I understand the skepticism. In our built world and our conventional infrastructure, we have hundreds of years of experience about how that infrastructure is going to perform. And every year, we have more examples of nature-based solutions, but we haven't yet had that body of knowledge to draw upon. And so, importantly, I think we have, we have the information to start. So our Green-Gray community of practice at Conservation International has a lot of resources, and we have experts around the world. And so for people who are looking to integrate nature into their projects, one of the key things is using those resources, but also creating multidisciplinary teams. So engineers, architects, landscape architects, ecologists, hydrologists, financiers, insurers. I get it, that's a big group, but that's the breadth and depth of teams and community that we need to bring along in our projects to realize them into the future. And I just want to say, I think that type of step is essential to address the triple threats of our aging infrastructure, our biodiversity loss, and climate change.
Yeah, great. And you mentioned that you were inspiring a whole new generation of investors. And so how do you think that we can really scale up the participation, especially of the private sector, into investing into nature-based solutions?
Yeah. So far, and this is my experience, is that the private sector has been involved with protecting their own assets or through corporate social responsibility investments, but I think importantly with the emergence of environmental and social governance targets that companies are setting and these big ambitions, that green-gray infrastructure and nature-based solutions as true infrastructure delivery have the opportunity to match some of those targets that companies are setting to themselves and to their investors. And so what we can do as project developers is talk about our projects and describe them in ways that they clearly meet the environmental and social governance that companies have set for themselves.
Excellent. Thank you, Emily.
Thank you.
And a round of applause for Emily. And our next presenter is Mr. Hiro Ito from the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development. Hiro is the EBRD's program manager for the Green City Action Plan. He oversees the development of Green City Action Plans for more than 20 cities, which proposes a list of infrastructure investments and policy measures to overcome environmental challenges. Today, Hiro is going to be talking about the Chisinau River Rehabilitation and Flood Protection Project in Moldova. Over to you.
Thank you very much for introduction. I'm going to talk about flood prevention measures in Moldova. I work for an organization called EBRD. It is a multilateral development bank. It provides financing and technical support for private sector as well as different levels of government in emerging economies. I work on a program called EBRD Green Cities, which consists of 4 components. Development of Green City Action Plan, investing in sustainable urban infrastructure, providing capacity building trainings, and supporting cities to access other sources of green financing. For example, in 2019, our program helped the city of Chisinau in Moldova to develop its Green City Action Plan. In the following year, in 2020, the Municipal Council of the Chisinau formally approved this plan to be their formal investment strategy. This plan was made inclusively with input from a wide variety of stakeholders, not only city officials, but academia, NGOs, local businesses, utility operators, by hosting a series of workshops, but also online surveys. There has been a lot of severe flood events in Chisinau in recent years. So the inputs from the stakeholders and the data suggested that this plan needs to focus on fixing the climate resilience issue of the city. So the action plan made the objective to strengthen the urban resilience and came up with a series of investment measures to address this challenge, including this rehabilitation of the River Bic, which runs through the center of the city. After the action plan was completed, we conducted a series of studies to prepare for the implementation of this proposal. And we came up with a mixture of the grey solutions, including the improvements to the storm drains, as well as the green solutions, for example, the introduction of sustainable urban drainage solutions throughout the cities. We also, the plan also includes the expansion of the catchment area, as well as addition of the recreational space around the riverbed. This is going to be the first project that EBRD is going to support that consists of the nature-based solution component. We managed to make a good progress in preparing this project, partly because there are a lot of data available on the economic cost from the recent flood, but also there's a good analysis suggesting that the frequency of the flood event is going to increase in a near future. Without these data, we consider preparing for climate adaptation project is still quite challenging, partly because it is not a revenue-generating investment project. Also, quantifying the benefit is still quite challenging. We are at the final stage of preparing this project, and we very much look forward to implementing these projects in near future. This is the end of my presentation. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Hiro, for sharing that great and inspiring project in Chisinau. Let's talk a little bit about the impact that kind of led you and the city of Chisinau to actually look at this particular project. So, why was this nature-based solution particularly important? And I guess, more generally, what impact can projects like this have on economic and social resilience?
It's a very good question. We emphasize the nature-based solution angle, partly because it has a much wider benefits, such as the increased amenity, the space can be used as a recreation, and it has an enhancement to the biodiversity. But in the long term, we believe it's going to be more cost efficient to consider nature-based solution as part of the project.
Okay, and how do you think that investments into resilient infrastructure such as this, how can they be scaled? And what would be the solution to secure more investment into infrastructure of this type?
I think in order to scale up the financing in the climate adaptation, we need to be able to calculate the avoided cost of the damage, as well as calculating the wide range of social and economic benefits that the project can bring, in order to prove the benefit can exceed the cost of investment. So in order to do that, I think we need a good evidence. We need to have a good data to support these studies. So I very much support the work that's currently being carried out by organizations like CDRI, as well as Global Infrastructure Hub, to consolidate all the important data on infrastructure.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Hiro, for sharing that project with us.
Thank you very much.
Yes. So we now move on to our third presenter who's joining us virtually. We have Ms. Katarina Jimara-Jushilo from the Green Climate Fund. Hello, Katarina. Are you with us? You can hear us okay?
Yes, I'm with you. Can you hear me?
Yes, perfectly. Look, thank you for joining us. So Katarina is the Human Settlements and Infrastructure Senior Specialist at the Green Climate Fund, or the GCF. And Katarina leads the Climate Resilient Infrastructure Result area in the GCF, shaping innovative methodologies for informed decisions to replace hard infrastructure with green solutions. Today, she's going to be talking about the Jamaica pilot on a step-by-step methodology going from climate science to investable projects. Katarina, over to you.
Thank you very much, and hello to everyone, being virtually or in person. This world needs an unprecedented paradigm shift to development that is resilient to climate shocks and sustainable in the long term. To respond to this need, GCF advances Jamaica Pilot, a step-by-step methodology from climate science to investable project concepts. The world's latest developmental era started around 8 years ago. The paradigm shift that we need today is to integrate climate resilience that works hand in hand with developmental and low-emission solutions, structured as sequence project pipelines and not the single projects. The first step is a good understanding of the existing climate hazards and the assignment of the strength of this hazard that human settlements and ecosystem must cope with. In areas with prominent natural hazards, climate and natural hazards has to be assessed in conjunction. Secondly, functional areas like water catchment area, vulnerability to climate change needs to be assessed, including geological, hydrological, and topographic analysis. Vulnerability analysis should capture interrelated infrastructure systems, neighboring ecosystems, most vulnerable groups, and economic value endangered by possible damage. The key to resilience is a systemic approach. Infrastructure works in systems, and this characteristics leads to sequence failures in case of climate change aggressors. This is the main reason why projects on the resilience of focus on resilience of only one asset are not capable to bring resilience against climate stressors. As already mentioned by my predecessors, built infrastructure is highly emitting, and steel and cement are produced in high temperatures provided by fossil fuel engines. Steel or cement are also heavily dependent on sand and minerals extraction, exacerbating climate problems. That's why green solutions should be prioritized. The methodology will allow to analyze the functional area of interrelated infrastructure, human settlements, and ecosystems, and structure meaningful streams of interventions. The project pipeline structure in this way will prioritize critical infrastructure and enable to bundle activities in the most efficient way from the impact and financial perspective. Analysis of the functional area of interrelated infrastructure, human settlements, ecosystems, can give us meaningful stream of interventions. The project pipeline structure in this way helps to clarify benefits of avoided losses and damages and the benefits of deployment of nature-based solutions. The structure of this methodology will enable scalability to new functional areas to structure new projects pipelines. The crucial gain is that the process of project selection and climate finance mobilization will be done with a full country ownership. Finally, the methodology will be ready for replication in any other country around the globe, and GCF will make whatever possible effort to help to build the capacity building for any other country that might be interested to build such project pipeline and to understand how to build the ownership for crowding in climate finance. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Katarina, for sharing that project with us. So I note your mention of the systemic approach to this particular project. I guess the systemic approach kind of introduces a level of ambiguity and complexity when it comes to adaptation, related projects. So how are, the projects on climate mitigation different to the projects related to adaptation? And what is the paradigm shift that you're seeing in moving, from a project that is looking to achieve mitigation versus adaptation?
Thank you very much for this question. Actually, when we were analyzing SGCF, because we have both mitigation and adaptation streams, actually mitigation pathway was much easier to be implemented through the developmental paradigm shift that already happened 80 years ago. If we look from the project structuring perspective, we just need to add the layer, which is emissions reduction, which can be energy efficiency, renewable energy, or just to structure project that is only addressing production of clean energy, for example. And also, if you look to economic analysis, this is much easier because there is one feature that actually addresses it, which is emissions reduction cost and all the markets that are built around it. If we look at adaptation to climate change, we cannot start with the developmental project as we did for last 80 years. We have to really start from the analysis of the well-defined functional area and look at the preliminary analysis of all the interrelated infrastructure, ecosystems, human settlements, and damages and losses that are caused by multiple climate hazards, usually working together and causing these damages. So actually this additional layer leads us to completely different set of projects that at the end can bring both resilience and developmental gains. But in addition, we have to think about the systemic structure of infrastructure so that we actually prioritize those interventions that enable to not to have the domino effect of failures in infrastructure. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you, Katarina. And I think that we do have a presenter later talking about that kind of ecosystem effect, especially when you're looking at risk transfer and, de-risking of some of those investments. Thank you so much. All right, moving on to our next presenter, who's also joining us virtually. We have Mr. Jirong Lim from the Climate Fund Managers. Jirong, are you with us?
Hi, thanks, Monica.
Excellent. So Jirong is an investment director at Climate Fund Managers. He is responsible for leadership of key projects and platforms for CFM managed funds, including the evaluation of potential investment opportunities. Today, Jirong is going to be talking about Climate Investor 2, a blended finance vehicle. Jirong, over to you.
Thanks, Monica. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Jirong Lim, an investment director of Climate Fund Managers based out of Singapore. And over the next few minutes, I'm here to talk to you about Climate Fund Managers and Climate Investor 2, what we do, how we do it, and why we do it. So who are we? Climate Fund Managers is a fund manager dedicated to financing projects that address climate change. Our mission is to mobilize private sector capital at scale to support climate change mitigation and adaptation efforts. And the way we do it is to use blended finance, which involves combining public and private funds to support projects that have a positive impact on the environment, do it at scale, and do it more quickly than how it has been done before. And we have two funds at the moment to achieve these aims: Climate Investor 1, that deals with renewable energy, and Climate Investor 2, which focus on water and oceans. And both funds actually focus on the emerging markets in Asia, Africa, and Latin America. And our investments in water are based on three big pillars: water, sanitation, and oceans. We support projects that first improve water quality and access to clean water, promote sustainable sanitation practices, and also projects that protect our oceans. Blended finance in action, what does it mean? It actually means, from our point of view, to support projects through the entire project life cycle. We provide funding for the early development, where development risks are higher, construction, and long-term operations and maintenance, with a focus on getting the project through the pipeline and to deliver the impact benefits as quickly as possible. And through Climate Investor 2, we target to treat over 2.5 billion cubic meters of water per day and to serve over 14 million people through accelerating this infrastructure investment in the provision of climate resilient water and sanitation infrastructure. In terms of the mandate that we cover the total water life cycle from water to sanitation and to oceans. And our projects will help to support sustainable water management practices, reduce pollution and output, promote healthy oceans management practice. Increasing water availability not only addresses the water scarcity issue, but also has a positive impact on closing the gender gap. Women and girls are responsible for water collection in 8 out of 10 households with water off premises, according to UN Water. And by increasing water availability, we can actually improve their access to education and economic opportunities through the freeing up of time. I just want to end off with a couple of projects that the Climate Investor 2 is currently supporting, one in Cambodia and one in Kenya, where the sponsors are separately developing solar-powered distributed desalination and water purification units, which actually enable water resilience as these are addressed at scale and distributed across communities. In conclusion, Climate Fund Managers is committed to using blended finance as a vehicle to support projects that have that positive impact on the environment. And investments in water, in our view, are essential to address the climate change and to improve and touch the lives of millions of people worldwide. Thank you all for your time.
Thank you very much, Jurong. So my question for you is actually quite similar to what I asked Catherine in the previous presentation. As a private financier, what have you found to be some of the challenges moving from Climate Investor 1, which is focused on renewables, and moving into Climate Investor 2, which is focused on water, waste, and oceans? So what challenges have you found from fundraising perspective, through to building a bankable pipeline of projects, for example? Keen to hear some of your views around that.
Yeah, thanks, Monica. I think that's a great question because I've spent the last 4 years on the Climate Investor 1 and on deployment in renewable energy. And prior to Climate Fund, I was also focused very much on renewable energy and on power side of the business. But in terms of the key difference that I found is it's really the fact that I think there are a couple of factors. One is that for renewable energy, it has been a proven technology, both on solar and on wind and on hydro particularly. And that aspect has helped to increase the investments in this particular sector. So in terms of maturity, it's much more mature. Whereas in water, you're actually addressing a whole host of different issues and different life cycles. So in terms of the sector scope, it is much more diverse. In terms of the revenue stream, compared to selling just electrons, which is a single revenue stream with some carbon credits and add-ons. In water, you are looking at a lot more different types of products. Are you selling the water? Are you treating the waste? Are you treating the wastewater? So there are a lot of different types of business models that we see in water that we do not see in Climate Investor 1. And in terms of fundraising, I think investor interest in financing both types of industries has been strong. However, in terms of, say, sourcing for bankable or traditional bankable projects, you always find that it's much harder in the water sector than it is in the, say, renewable energy sector. But we do find that by sort of applying a focus on cash flows and on innovative treatment of this type of projects, we are able to find opportunities when such an investment can catalyze sort of build out of the water infrastructure.
Great, thank you. And you obviously have a very you obviously have a very innovative blended finance structure for your particular fund, which helps to address some of those challenges. But if there was one thing that you could change in the enabling environment that could help you cross some of those barriers, what would it be?
I think it's more of a wish list because we take things as it is in terms of where the water sector is. But I think one thing you see in the renewable or in PPAs that you don't see it that often would be some sort of sovereign guarantee or some sort of support mechanism, especially in terms of municipal contracts. But you also see that, in terms of the deployment, in India particularly, you have SECI that has been quite a big game changer in the rollout of the renewable energy space, and seeing something like that in the water sector would be also very helpful in accelerating the deployment of capital, whether in India or elsewhere as well.
Thank you, Jurong. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We will now move to our fifth presenter, Mr. Sridhar Sampath. Sridhar is the Director of Infrastructure Investments at Water Equity. He is responsible for planning Water Equity's investments into water and sanitation infrastructure, building a team and creating a pipeline of investable opportunities. So today, Sridhar is going to be talking about Water Equity's journey towards financing climate-resilient infrastructure. Sridhar, over to you.
Thank you, Monica. Thanks for that introduction. I'm Sridhar Sampath, Director of Infrastructure Investments at Water Equity. And the title of the slide is, it's gone off. Climate change is already having a profound impact on the water cycle in different parts of the world. You find droughts and floods. To a woman who has to trudge kilometers to fetch her water daily, the river or lake running dry is a calamity. Now, in most parts of the world, it is women who have to travel long distances to collect water for their household needs. And often they do all the washing at the water source, so that saves time. They bring water back home. This means they miss college, they miss school, and they don't get education. Lack of education keeps them in poverty. Now, Water Equity, we have provided loans to this lady in a part of Odisha, state of India, for a water connection, a $150 loan for a water connection, which has helped her to save time in going to fetch water. She and her children are getting education, and hopefully they can come out of poverty. Now, around the world, Water Equity has provided more than 3.8 million people access to safe water and safely managed sanitation through credit, so that they can build a toilet or a water connection in their homes, and this improves their quality of life. Now, you can see here, these are people who got access now, but then just providing access to water and sanitation through loans is one part of the solution. But what if the taps run dry? What if there's no facility to evacuate the fecal sludge? So we need to address the lack of infrastructure and climate variability as a major issue. So now what we are doing in Water Equity is to look at providing capital for the construction of infrastructure in emerging markets, in low and middle income countries, for setting up water supply systems, for treating wastewater in communities. We're looking to finance the entire water cycle, starting from water sourcing, water treatment, water distribution, wastewater collection and treatment, and wastewater reuse. And this is both for municipal and for industrial water and wastewater. So we're looking to finance climate-resilient infrastructure that also improves climate resilience of the communities. One example is this air-to-water generator, which provides water from a very sustainable source. So our aim is to finance sustainable sources of infrastructure, diversify the sources of water instead of excessive reliance on groundwater. Now, these are some of the examples of what we are looking to finance. A smart metering company that provides a very innovative solution by enabling people to pay for their water daily rather than at the end of the month, which makes it much more easily doable. Or a wastewater treatment company that sets up small-scale sewage treatment plants in apartments. Now, this is another example of the Ganges River, which is a holy river in India. Now, this is a very polluted river. We're looking to finance some of these projects that clean up the water that goes into the river and helps, this is part of a larger ecosystem of projects that are helping to clean the Ganges and keep the river clean. Thank you.
Thank you, Sridhar, for sharing that rather unique perspective on financing water. So you mentioned that you started in financing households to help them get access to water, and that you're now expanding to financing infrastructure across the water supply value chain. Can you expand a little bit more, I guess, on this strategy for Water Equity, and I guess where you see the fund going over the next 12 months?
Sure, thanks. We are right now setting up the fund. We should have the money in like 6 months' time. In Q4, we expect to begin investing. Our strategy is to invest into two different sleeves, let's say two different asset classes. The first is project SPVs, which are typical project finance. Water supply projects, wastewater treatment projects, wastewater reuse projects, and so on, housed in concessions and BOTs and so on and so forth. The other sleeve is we're looking to invest on the balance sheets of companies that have innovative solutions, that manufacture products, that have services, that have technologies for solving the water problem. Now, in the 12 months from the time we achieve first close, which hopefully, we're pretty confident is going to be Q4 23. In the next 12 months, we are looking to commit at least $50 million. And our investment focus geographies are Southeast Asia, South Asia, Sub-Saharan Africa, and Latin America. And we are already building a good pipeline, and we are pretty confident that we will be able to create a very good impact in the fund as we go along.
And if I may ask one more question, you talked about investing into balance sheets of companies. You mentioned a couple of technology companies. Is that also kind of form part of your strategy moving forward, or are you being a little bit more opportunistic when it comes to those sorts of investments?
So for investment into the balance sheets of companies, we've actually identified 3 or 4 areas that have a lot of potential and that can really create impact. One is construction companies that are building infrastructure. So in many parts of the world, those companies need a capacity building. They need capital, they need governance support. So we're looking to support construction companies. We're looking to support some of those construction companies migrate to becoming developers. So today that's not happening because they don't have the capacity. So we're looking to support those companies. We're looking selectively at technology companies that have innovative solutions to the problem because projects are a good solution, but sometimes you need new technology to break through barriers. So these are some of the areas. And of course, there are some companies into services, which are again very essential. So there are 3 broad areas we're looking at.
Excellent. Thank you so much. That
Thanks
was very
much.
interesting.
Thanks for the opportunity.
Great. So that's our first group. We're soon going to be moving into the second group of presenters. But I guess before we do that, just wanted to summarize some thoughts, I guess, that I've taken away from some of those presentations. I guess one of the challenges is that there is no set or common definition for what are the adaptation pathways for infrastructure and what is resilient infrastructure. But what we've seen today from some of these presentations is that there are strong themes about resilient infrastructure being related to nature-based solutions and being related to water infrastructure as well. And I guess if you look at those, if you were going to describe those kinds of investments, that you could say that there is infrastructure for resilience, which is infrastructure such as water that enable the resilience of communities and societies and people. And potentially the healthcare system as well. And then there is resilient infrastructure, which is infrastructure where specific and innovative design elements have been integrated to ensure that it is resistant to shocks and to damage. So, so it's interesting to see how different people define this, from a sector-based perspective through to a design-based or even a risk-based perspective, which we're going to be going into next. But also interesting to see that a lot of the case studies that we have looked at with respect to nature-based solutions have primarily been publicly financed, whereas I think in the water space, especially in emerging markets, that's starting to go into private sector financing now as well through some innovative blended finance structures. So. Yes, it was incredibly interesting for me to learn a little bit more about those projects, and hopefully you felt the same. So, okay, well, we're now going to move on to our second round of presentations. And the second round is going to be talking about instruments for risk transfer and a solution to help mitigate the risk in public sector buildings. And looking at the role that they might be able to play in reducing this risk profile for resilient infrastructure for investors. And the result has been that there's been greater mobilization of private sector capital going into those particular projects. So I would like to now call on our first presenter in the second group, Ms. Girija Biyani. Girija is a client manager for public sector solutions at Swiss Re India. And Girija's areas of expertise include disaster risk financing through insurance, the role of insurance in sustainability and climate adaptation, resilient infrastructure, public health, and more. Today, Girija is going to be talking about Nepal's renewable energy project financing. Girija, over to you.
Thank you very much, Monica. Hello, everyone. I'm Girija Biyani, as introduced by Monica, and today I will be speaking or trying to tell you a story about a project in Nepal. The country of Nepal, which is one of the member countries of CDRI, has acute power shortages, which requires a lot more building of new projects for especially renewable energy projects to harness the capabilities of the region and have big projects that allow more power generation. This is a story of one such project. Specifically, in the site of UT1 on the Trishuli River, about 70 kilometers northeast of Kathmandu, a project was envisioned for 216 megawatts hydropower. And this project is obviously in an earthquake-prone area. This was a known fact. However, this is one of the best locations to have such a project. What happened is, in 2015, a 7.8 magnitude earthquake devastated Nepal and caused damage to the project site and the early works that were already constructed. Also following this event, globally, there were a lot of hydro dam damages, which led to severe constraint in any kind of risk capacity or insurance coverages available for the region. Once the project was again revived by the financiers, they found that they could not procure any kind of insurance coverages without seeing an earthquake exclusion, which meant that there would have to be some innovating that needs to happen, and innovative techniques that would have to come into the picture for financing this very vital and country-building project. Swiss Re Corporate Solutions, in close collaboration with the IFC and Aon, which is an insurance broker, was able to structure a parametric insurance. This cover met all the requirements that came from this large cohort of financiers. There were 9 MDBs. This is an example of the largest FDI ever made into Nepal. For those of you that don't know much about parametric insurance, there's usually an underlying parameter, as the name suggests. In this case, it was the shaking intensity of the ground due to earthquake. And this is measured at the exact location of the asset, notwithstanding where the epicenter was or what the magnitude of the earthquake was. Second, the payout changes to accommodate the asset value. The value of the asset and construction will depend on the phase of the construction as well as the time in the project cycle. And typically, insurance just has a single payout. In this case, the losses or the limits are modeled to what the asset value would be. This is a very good example of how innovation happens in order to support very specific project financing. And this is something that gave all these MDBs and the entire SPV comfort to invest in this project again. So where else can you think of risk transfer? Roughly speaking, there are 2 areas when de-risking of projects becomes very important. 1, when you have physical damage that you need to cater to, and 2, when you have to protect your revenue stream. As you can see, we have a lot of global experience across many, many different asset types and across many, many different natural disasters, as well as other reasons for revenue protection where de-risking is required. We work with asset owners, financiers, contractors, operators across the entire project cycle. To conclude, I represent an organization called Swiss Re, and we're very keen to support project financiers as well as asset owners to mobilize better capital, private sector capital, and make their projects more bankable and support throughout the de-risking life cycle of this project. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for sharing that very unique insurance solution that was created for Nepal. I guess more generally, can you share with us a little bit more information as to the role that infrastructure can play in mobilizing private sector capital into resilient infrastructure, and maybe giving some examples, say, in the transport sector or in the energy sector?
Thank you, Monica. So this is a very good question. I believe, fundamentally speaking, de-risking any project is a key part to making it more resilient. What does de-risking look like will, of course, depend on the project itself, but most often, there is a physical asset damage that needs to be considered. This is where insurance plays a fairly obvious role by protecting or providing coverages in the event of a disaster. Say for transport, it could look like protecting roads against flooding. This is something we have done in the country of Colombia. I mean, we're currently exploring protecting all of the Colombian roads against flooding events that happen regularly. The money can then be used for rebuilding and creating new roads, or at least finding ways for people to adapt to new transport measures as soon as possible. But the other thing also that's important is this revenue protection idea. So mobilizing private capital requires that whoever is financing this project has a certain amount of comfort in this project. So de-risking and reducing the risk of reducing the volatility itself in the revenue stream that you expect from an asset is also quite critical. So we have a lot of examples where insurance can support to keep the revenue stream steady, and for private sector financiers to get a lot more comfort in investing in new greenfield projects.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Girija, for your presentation today. Our next presenter is joining us virtually. We have Mr. Karsten Loeffler. Karsten is the co-head of the Global Shield Solutions platform, one of the financing vehicles under the Global Shield Against Climate Risks, something managed by the Frankfurt School of Finance and Management. Today, Karsten is going to be talking about the Global Shield Solutions platform and the Inshu Resilience Solutions Fund. It's a mouthful, Karsten. Good luck. Good luck to you. Excellent. Over to you, Karsten.
Yeah, thank you, Monica. Good afternoon, everyone. I will talk about two vehicles supporting the dissemination of climate and disaster risk finance and insurance solutions. The objective is to improve the resilience of poor and vulnerable households against the impacts of climate change and natural disasters. So to start with, the Inshu Resilience Solutions Fund promotes the development of innovative and sustainable climate risk insurance products in developing and emerging countries with a pro-poor focus. The fund provides grant-based co-funding of up to 2.5 million and advice to partnerships between local public entities, private companies in the insurance sector, and NGOs. This pictures what climate-related risk financing instruments can look like in practice. Prerequisite for the Inshu Resilience Solutions Fund is that a stakeholder from the supply side, for instance, a risk taker, joins forces with the stakeholder from the supply side. So for instance, an organization that organizes the protection of vulnerable populations. There are three main components of the fund's support. First, research and education to make informed decisions. Second, concept development support, in particular early phase support. And lastly, product development support. When we look at the second fund, the Global Shield Solutions platform, that was established by the initiative of the V20 group of vulnerable countries and the G7 under the Global Shield Against Climate Risks. So the aim is to provide more coherent, sustained, and better coordinated financial protection against climate risks. And this is done by an inclusive in-country process that operates based on a comprehensive in-country coordination amongst key stakeholders. This is led by the Vulnerable 20 group of countries who will invite countries to become partner countries of the Global Shield. The in-country process has two building blocks after the inclusive in-country consultations. First, a stocktake of climate and disaster finance and insurance activities in the respective country. And secondly, a gap and vulnerability analysis to develop a long list of options for further action that should be prioritized as the next step. And this is exactly what comes out of that, a request for climate and disaster risk finance and insurance support by the Global Shield Solutions platform. This request reflects country priorities and existing risk transfer solutions. Based on a problem statement, the Global Shield Solutions platform develops a tailor-made country program in close cooperation with a country. And it's again linked to building the foundations with research and education and risk assessment and modeling support. It's about solutions development, risk transfer solutions development, and implementation support. This is very important that premium and capital support for the actual implementation of risk transfer products will be available. And the development of all this will be done in close cooperation by the fund with respective country representative. You find further information on the respective websites of the Insur-Resilient Solutions Fund and the Global Shield Solutions Platform. Thank you for having me.
Thank you very much, Carsten, for presenting those solutions to us. I think it's a great example of a scalable solution to de-risking, including capacity building program, as well as potentially looking at solutions at the country level. So how does one get access to the support from these two programs that you were talking about?
Yeah, first, the Insur-Resilient Solutions Fund, as I briefly mentioned, it's a joint force by a demand side and a supply side institution, i.e. a risk taker on the one hand side, and an institution that faces clients. In that respect, so that this is the nucleus that is very important to get to a successful insurance product that actually will fly at the market. With respect to the Global Shield Solutions Platform, it's different, and that's the reason why it's a separate fund that has been established. This is a country-led process, and a respective country will have to apply, will have to partner with the Global Shield in order to become eligible for starting the in-country dialogue, and then finally the support by the Global Shield Solutions Platform, and potentially more financing vehicles that sit in parallel to the Global Shield Solutions Platform.
Great, thank you. And can you give us a few examples of the sorts of infrastructure assets or projects that have been covered by this, in the past? Like how well established are those platforms in the implementation stage?
Yeah, the Insur-Resilient Solutions Fund has been around for a few years, 4 years to be exact. Infrastructure plays a role. It's important to acknowledge that it has a dedicated pro-poor focus, what means $50 power purchasing parity will be the focus group that needs to be addressed by both funds in the end. The infrastructure is part and can be part of the solution as long as this target group benefits, and this can be substantiated from the fund's support. The Global Shield Solutions Platform is just about to being launched officially in 8 weeks, beginning of June. So we will have to gather more experience here, but certainly, again, resilient infrastructure is very high on the priority list, but this needs to be acknowledged and be taken into account that the priority setting will be done by the respective country. So it's up to the country to say, okay, we want to protect infrastructure over, say, maybe providing cover for the agricultural sector.
Thank you so much, Carsten, for your presentation today.
Thanks for having me.
Our next presenter is Dr. Chiara Cardacci. Chiara is a senior expert at the Italian Civil Protection Department in the fields of prevention, preparedness, emergency response, and disaster risk reduction. Chiara is also the Italian national focal point for the Sendai Framework for DRR. Today, Chiara is going to be talking about financing social infrastructure, and in particular, the Italian Seismic Risk Prevention Plan. Thank you, Chiara. Over to you.
Thank you, Monica. So we are going to speak about the Italian Seismic Risk Prevention Plan. It's one of our prevention measurements. So Italy is a very high seismic country, and we have a frequently struck by destructive earthquakes. So you can see some examples, and all caused a lot of victims. As we know that earthquakes, in these earthquakes collapse a lot of buildings and also government institutions. how we know the seismic risk in Italy. Studying the hazard, and we improve our studying and arrived at the seismic map. We have, after the earthquake of L'Aquila in 2009, we have a plan for seismic prevention with structural and non-structural action. This plan give an amount of euro and was refinanced until 2099. The plan implementation foresee action, not structure, as a seismic zonation and emergency plan, and structural prevention, based on vulnerability reduction. This action is carried out by the local and the national administration. The upgrading of a seismic building infrastructure produce more than 2,300 interventions. The add value of this plan is a rise awareness regarding seismic risk and increasing the prevention culture, engaging the local government and private by co-financing, and prioritizing the intervention in the more highest area. We know that seismic risk mitigation is very time-consuming and it's very expensive to achieve. Huge investment and long-term mitigation policy we need. To conclude, the current allocation found is still large and insufficient, but it's important that the funding is continued. And for this, we refound our plan. And just to conclude again, we spent a lot of money in the reconstruction, and so we try to think before to make a prevention action. Thank you.
Thank you, Chiara, for that presentation. I actually wanted to ask you about the data on risk and the ability to prioritize the investments. As you say, Italy's investing a lot of money into the mitigation of these buildings. So can you tell us a little bit more about the research that you're doing to be able to understand these high-risk seismic zones?
Yes, we saw very quickly before the hazard map, and for us is the base on which we identify the high-level seismic area. And in this way, we can make a prioritization of the interviews. This is also important because it is the basis of the building code. In high-risk area, you have different indication for the building. Of course, we continue on the study about to better identify the seismic area.
Okay, thank you. And you mentioned also, well, you didn't mention in your presentation, but you mentioned to me that you run a special program for schools as well, which...
yes. Unfortunately, after tragedy, governments pay attention to the problem. We had a very, not so big earthquakes. The magnitude is quite low, 5.4. In the village in South Italy, and in that occasion a school collapsed and trapping almost 100 people. Of these, 27 children, one teacher died. After this, the Italian government started with a extraordinary plan to the prevention of seismic risk in the scholar building. It was the first step. The plan and the funding continues. And in some occasion, in some part of Italy, this plan takes into account not only the seismic risk, but also fire and flood risks.
Okay, great. Thank you so much for sharing this story with us today.
Yes, thank you to you. Bye.
And our final presenter for today is Mr. Arun Krishnan. Arun is a program manager for the Climate Policy Initiative, or the CPI. He leads the India regional program of the Global Innovation Lab in Climate Finance. Arun's expertise lies in climate change, urban infrastructure, transport, smart cities, and airports. And today, Arun is going to be talking about the CILRIF, which I am going to let you explain in terms of what that actually means.
Thank you.
Over to you.
Thank you, Monica. So it's quite a mouthful, so I'm just going to say CILRIF. Okay, so Climate Policy Initiative, okay, let's move on to the next slide. So I'll start with this. Cities are complex adaptive systems. You have layers of infrastructure. So if there is disruption in one layer due to disaster, you have multiplicative effects, and therefore ULBs, urban local bodies, find it a challenge to fight disasters after the disasters happen. Now, building climate resilience in urban infrastructure is at a nascent stage. You have the West, which has done a lot of investments. This particular photo is from London on River Thames. But you have emerging markets which have done almost no investments in urban building resilience in urban infrastructure. So can we think about insurance instrument, right, which would help fight or which would help cities in reconstruction post the disaster, right? So we at CPI, we are working with UNCDF to develop one such instruments. So this is the structure of CILRIF. I'm sorry, there's a lot of data here, but primarily there are three parts to this instrument. The first one is a financing facility which will help ULBs make investments in a resilient infrastructure. The second part is the insurance facility, which is either parametric or the normal kind of insurance, which will help cities recover once the disaster happens. And finally, you have the technical assistance facility in order to help the cities build up the capacity to implement such instruments. So the implementation plan broadly is in the pilot stage. So right now, they are piloting with Makati City and Durban, which I will come to subsequently. This is the amount of investment which is required, but the value can go up or down depending on the number of cities which are interested. But broadly, this is what we have identified as the initial investment amount. So Makati City is the foremost business district of Philippines, right? And naturally, any disaster there can be terrible for the economy. So they have identified flooding as one of the risk areas they want to insure against. So they have worked, the UNCDF has provided technical advisory on this, on developing an insurance product against flooding. So it has not yet been implemented, but the TA has been done, and they have identified they require a 200-year flood insurance. Durban, again, is very prone to flooding, and this study is at an initial stage, but C40 Cities has identified that insurance can be one of the products which can help them fight the risk of flooding or reconstruct after flooding. So these are the SDGs impacted. As I said, cities are complex adaptive systems. So you have a multiple effects on lives and livelihoods because of disaster. And this is what this instrument is trying to solve for. And obviously, partnerships are important. It's heartening to see that Munich Re is here, or was it Swiss Re? I'm sorry. But these are the partners. Insurance companies and reinsurance companies are an important part of this coalition, but so are public sector entities, as well as DFIs, MDBs, and so on. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Harun, for sharing that with us. You mentioned that there were, the three elements of this particular instrument. I'm actually interested to know, the kind of impact that you would see in mobilizing some of the private finance into the financing aspect of that. Once you actually have, the insurance product on board in terms of being able to provide that risk transfer. What impact do you expect you'll see in terms of mobilizing some of that capital?
Yeah, as you know, cities have 50% of humanity. And any disaster in cities will impact not only lives, but also livelihoods. So you have ULBs, which do not have enough financing for resilient infrastructure. And private finance is a very important part of the puzzle, and so is insurance. So if we are able to mobilize private finance as part of this instrument, I think it will have a very big impact, and not only a direct impact, but also a multiplicative impact. So there's a GDP multiplier here. Durban, for example, has identified that for every 1 rand in resilient investment, the city will be able to save 3.5 rands in terms of the output, right? So the multiplicative impact is what matters.
Yeah, okay, thank you. And you mentioned that there are a couple of pilots ongoing at the moment for this instrument. I mean, what have you learned so far, and how is this going to evolve in the future?
Yeah, so, insurance is, you have the problem of lemons. So if you're not going to mandate it nationally or mandate it transnationally, then you're going to have this problem that the ULBs which come for insurance will be the ones which have the maximum impact from disaster. So one of the lessons is that this instrument may work very well if it is nationally mandated and a lot of municipalities are covered, so that multiple risks are covered, as well as there's a dampening effect, if you will, between the municipalities in terms of payouts, insurance payouts. The other lesson is that we are thinking of urban infrastructure in terms of standalone assets, whereas we should be thinking in terms of service provision, right? So when a disaster happens, the asset, of course, gets damaged, but also the service provision by the ULB gets damaged, right? So we should think about ensuring that as well on top of asset insurance. So I think these are the lessons we learned from this instrument.
Great, thank you so much.
Thank you
very much for your presentation.
Thank you, Monica.
And that concludes our Pecha Kucha session in terms of the speakers. And I guess just to summarize that session, it was interesting to see the different kinds of risk transfer instruments, looking from the very sort of localized level, from a parametric insurance perspective, all the way through to country and international, G20 platforms when it comes to de-risking resilient infrastructure. So it's very encouraging to see that these are emerging, and very interested to see how they progress as well, and the lessons that have been learned and the impact that it can also achieve. So we're now opening up to the floor for general Q&A. Does anybody have any questions for the panelists? And while people are thinking about their questions, can I just ask, Jessica, how much time have we got left? 10 minutes? Okay, yes.
Thank you. I'm Agostino Goretti from Italian Civil Protection Department. I have two questions, one for the first speaker and the other for the expert on insurance. To the first speaker, I would like to ask if in the cost-benefit analysis that was mentioned, there is a willing to include also indicators like carbon footprints or something like that, and if including or not these indicators, rather than construction cost and maintenance, will impact the results of the analysis. So we'll say that maybe these solutions are more or less, I would say, effective considering everything. And to the other expert on insurance, I would like to ask if they have some experience in tailoring the premium in order to push for some, I would say, implementation of some prevention measures, so reducing the physical vulnerability, so not just transferring the risk. So how these two things can be, can have synergies or not, if they have some experience on this. Thanks.
Okay, Emily.
Great, thank you for the question. So I think you're referring to the case study from Colombia. So this was a green-gray alternative to widening a roadway. And the cost-benefit analysis that we did was a triple bottom line. So it looked at the environmental, social, and economic costs and benefits. And one of the main drivers to the benefits of the green-gray solution was the restoration of thousands of mangroves. And we were able to quantify the benefits from carbon sequestration, carbon capture, from the regrowth of those mangroves, in addition to biodiversity benefits and fisheries. So one of the main challenges that we still have, even after we quantify those benefits, is willingness to pay. Who is actually going to pay for those benefits once they're realized to incentivize the alternative solution? Though in our case, the alternative solution was cheaper than the gray-only solution, so that wasn't as much of an issue. But thank you for the question.
I think probably the next question is to Girija. Is that right, Agostino?
Yes, but there were many presentations relating to insurance, so any of them could contribute from, but
okay,
maybe
sure.
We can start from Switzerland.
Thank you, Agostina. To answer your question, if I understand it correctly, you're thinking about, can we use premiums also as an incentive for people to, have more adaptation mitigation measures and see a direct impact in premium? I don't have a very straightforward answer for you, but I can provide a little bit of perspective, to be honest. So we see this happen in a lot of other kinds of insurance anyway. We see that with better health outcomes, you see a change in your premium for your health insurance. We see where you take certain activities to become a better risk, as we would technically call it, you do see an impact on the premium. If you refer to the case study that was presented by Carsten, there was a project in the state of Nagaland where an ISF grant was given out. Part of this was to create an insurance product that's relevant to the state and that actually supports the state. But the other part of the grant was also used for developing a lot of mitigation measures. Should the state and states like these just continue with more and more activities around mitigation and adaptation, you will realize that the premium will naturally come down because the risk quality improves significantly. So there is going to be a very easy to observe impact of more mitigation activities. But in general, insurance is to be considered as a part of an ecosystem and rarely as the only catch-all standalone solution. So we're very happy to discuss how can premiums be tailored in order to enable such activities when it comes to public sector asset owners or even private sector asset owners. So hope this helps.
And I might check in with Carsten as well to see if, do you have a response to that in terms of the impact that you're seeing at scale, I suppose, on the impact on insurance premiums?
Yeah, no, I see it was just outlined very well. I'd only like to add that the incentive structures need to be taken into consideration in a way that just by the interaction between the insured and the insurer, there's, at least from the insurer's perspective, not an immediate incentive to adapt the insurance premium. First, the risk adjustment needs to take place. And here it's very important to see this, as just mentioned, as an ecosystem where there's incentives in addition to the contractual relationship to address the resilience issue. And this is even more important because over time, climate-related risks might might get much more severe. So in order to ensure the insurability over the medium term, at least, it's very important to address the resilience issues right away, just to stay on the safe side of the coin.
Thank you very much. I think we'll have time for one more question. Is there anybody else that wanted to ask a question? No? In that case, I may ask one question maybe to a couple of panelists, similar to a question that I asked Jirong before. If there was one change in the enabling environment that would enable you to do your job better and more effectively, what would that be? And I'll start with Hiro because he's kind of in the thick of it in terms of the enabling environment. So Hiro, do you want to kick off that quick fire response in 30 seconds or less?
I think for me to do more nature-based solution project, I think it will be useful if there's some kind of internationally agreed valuation method to evaluate the benefit of ecosystem services. So that'll be my enabler. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. And Katarina, are you still on the line with us? Given that you have a methodology. Given that you have a methodology which is in essence, part of the enabling environment, I suppose. I mean, what are your perceptions around that? Are there any barriers that you perceive to that? Really, being able to advance investment into resilient infrastructure?
I would like to relate from where you started the presentation about this three enabling elements by the World Bank. And as you said, we need climate data and climate information, and then we need the finance. I would say what for me is the most important is what is in between. So how we translate this climate data to developmental pathways and produce actually projects that make a difference. And then I think financing would be much easier when countries will be owning and promoting the pipelines that build their own resilience, coming from their own priorities. So this would be probably my answer.
Thank you. And I guess last, I'm going to direct that question to Sridhar. What would be the one change in the enabling environment for you that will really help you, in your current and future strategy?
Yeah, thanks. So I think the biggest thing is that climate mitigation is very well understood, and policymakers understand it very well. By now, it's really gone into the DNA of policymakers, but not climate mitigation has gone, but climate resilience hasn't. I think that'd be a big change to have climate resilience as an important consideration and have policies built around that and regulations built around that, which can make for a better tomorrow. It's not always possible to wait for the market to demand that, but sometimes policy drives it, regulation drives it, and then market catches up. So I think that's a big change I would like to see.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. And so that closes our session today, and I'd like to thank everybody for being here with us today, especially this is the last session of the conference as well. But before everybody leaves, we'd like to invite all of the speakers to come up on stage to accept a certificate of appreciation. And is it right to say that a tree has been planted for every presenter and participant here, which is fantastic, and that makes me very excited. So oh, this one's mine. Okay. Sridhar, this one's for you.
Thank you.
Girja. Arun, here you are. Chiara? Hiro? And Emily. Thank you. And thank you too for our online presenters. Oh yes, I'll take mine. And We'll send you a virtual certificate. I think that's what we'll do. And I think we're now going to take a photo. So. Great. Thank you so much.